Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? It's Geoff, Mosher, Adam Caplan, and we're going to complete our four-part NFC East Preview Series by going through the Philadelphia Eagles. And of course, it's presented by our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City, the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. And just like we've done with Washington, New York, and Dallas, we are going to finish this with Philadelphia by bringing back our old friend. Well, no, you're not old, Greg. You're just an old friend of ours. Yeah, I didn't mean to
some days I
disparage you
feel
there.
like that, Geoff, but thank you.
I feel the same way sometimes.
Yeah.
But we bring you back to finish off this series here that we do every year, and we're gonna go through the Philadelphia Eagles. And Greg, it's like a common theme, other than the Cowboys, just all the changes within the division.
There's a lot.
From coordinators to personnel. The Eagles have had a ton of changes, and obviously a lot of that was precipitated by their collapse last year, where they won one of their last 7 games, which is, I think, as we look back on it, Greg, like, you watch more tape than anybody. Adam and I do this we're at it every day talking Eagles, but if there's ever the illustration of the phrase "nobody knows anything," it's who would have seen the Eagles losing 6 of 7, even with the flaws that we knew they had last year, just completely just going right into the tank and losing 6 of their last 7 games last year. I don't think anybody could have predicted that.
No, I don't think anybody could have at all.
Yeah.
I mean, coming off the Super Bowl year with, a young quarterback who was at the top of his game and, a coaching staff that seemed to be really in sync. No one could have predicted what happened a year ago. But it'll be interesting. I mean, obviously we're going to go through and talk some things now, but I think there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, quite frankly, you guys may know more. You're probably a little more clued into the building right now than I am. But there's a lot of changes here, and it's going to be hard to make definitive statements about exactly what we're going to see.
All right, so let's get into that, Greg. Kellen come in. We know him from Dallas and the Chargers, and he's been around a long time, former player. What are your thoughts on Kellen Moore here as a coordinator and also with this club?
It'll be different. He's very multiple. You're going to see a lot of different personnel packages. He's a believer in motion, so we're going to see how that all plays out, because we know they've not been a motion team for reasons, multiple reasons that we probably all know. But I don't think you bring in Kellen Moore with the idea that you're going to hamstring him and say you can't do this. So I think this is going to be a kind of different looking offense in the use of personnel, with the stronger and more volume use of motion. So I think it'll be a little bit different. The big question, obviously, is now the run game. They brought in Saquon Barkley. I don't think you bring in Saquon Barkley unless you plan on him being a foundation piece. So now you get into that whole balance issue, which every team defines that differently, obviously. When you have Derrick Henry, the balance is different than if you have, James Cook. I mean, it's different, So what do we know about that? I mean, did they anticipate having Barkley get the, carry the ball? I'm not talking about touches. I'm talking about running back carries. Did they foresee Barkley being close to 300 carries if he's healthy for 17 games?
That's a great question. Yeah, I don't know if we can answer that. I
don't think, and I'm not saying I can answer it either. I don't want to present to the audience that, hey, I know exactly what's going to happen, because none of us do.
No, but I would say this, Greg. You were actually the first person to say this, based as always strictly on tape study. Barkley's a big guy, but he's not really a drive sustainer. I thought that was a point you've made very clearly.
Wow.
And
it's funny because
go ahead.
I actually talked with someone who played with him at Penn State, believe it or not, yesterday, and they were very close, and they're actually very good friends. But so we were talking honestly, and I just said, hey, let me throw something out to you about Saquon. And I gave my point, the one that you just said, that he's not really that kind of back. And the guy agreed with me 100%. And there, and he played with him, because I said he's super explosive. I said any given play, any given game, he can break off 60-yard runs for a touchdown. I mean, he is that guy without question. But despite his Tarzan build and the fact that he looks so powerful, he's never really been a great runner in confined space. He's a little tight in his hips. He's not really loose in terms of his lateral movement when there's bodies around him. And despite his size, he doesn't run like a power runner. And when I say that, I don't mean he running people over. That's not what power running means in the NFL. Very rarely, excuse me, do you see a back, just run over people, just like you don't see offensive linemen pancake people. It's the NFL. You don't normally see those kinds of things. That's not what the definition of strength and power is in the NFL. Power backs to me in the league, and you don't have to be 230 pounds to run like this. Someone like Emmitt Smith was great at this. Is when it looks like it's blocked for 3, you get 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of, after the play's over, you kind of go, wow, he got 7 yards. Because it looked like it wasn't there.
Right.
That's kind of what it is. Barkley's never really been that guy. But like I said, on the other hand, he can break one off, and he's a terrific receiver. You can detach him from the formation.
It's interesting also, the pass protection, Greg, when the Eagles signed him, it sort of went around that this is going to be really good for their pass protection. And Adam and I did a podcast, and we had spoke to some people who had either played or coached or been around him, and they said, he should be probably better at it given his size. It's really not his best attribute. Is that also jump out to you? That
it's Geoff, that's a really good point you just made for this reason. Is Kenneth Gainwell was their third down back a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a really good pass protector. And he's obviously a good receiver as well. And they also moved him around the formation. Now, obviously, it's a different OC with Kellen Moore. But, as we sit here right now, Gainwell's their number 2 back. I mean, they drafted Will Shipley, who, by the way, is a really good football player. Now, he's not a feature back. He's
Mm-hmm.
not big enough to be that guy. But Will Shipley is a really good football player. And, he can do pretty much everything. He's another really good receiver, too. So, again, that's why I asked the question about Barkley. I think the public perception is that Barkley's one of the, top 2 or 3 backs in the league. And I wasn't suggesting he's not a good player or that he's the 20th best back. And that wasn't my point. But the point is, given his injury history and the fact that he's not a kid anymore, he's now been in the league for a number of years. What is his volume situation going to be?
Great question. I certainly could see, and again, this is if the Eagles are a winning team, by the end of the game, he might have 17, 18 carries. But philosophically, that the Eagles typically want to come out throwing the football and then get the lead and run the football in the second half. So that's my point and why I brought it up. Barkley, is he a guy that you want to give a lot of volume to in the second half to put a game away? Despite his size.
You know what? He has not been that guy in his career. There were games with the Giants, and we may have talked about this, over the years. I know I've talked about it with others, where the Giants tried to use him as a closer. And granted, they did not have a good O-line. I don't want people to think it's all Barkley. Obviously, the Giants for the last couple of years did not have a very good O-line at all. But he's not. I don't think his traits are that of a closer.
Got it. Let's also talk about Kellen Moore. You mentioned motion, some of the different offensive trinkets that he'll bring in. So I want to ask you about that. But first, we're going to pause real quick to hear a word from our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City.
Go to get your game on. Go for the beers. Go for the cheers. Go for the hit and the hits. Go for the stakes and the stakes. Go to get your parlay on. Go to get your party on. Go for the scene. Go for the screens. Go for the gallery. Go for the win. Go to Ocean. Visit theoceanac.com to plan your visit.
Greg, we've had a lot of discussions with you about motion, the concept of motion, who uses motion, and why and how they use motion. Some use it in the run game, some in the pass, some for a tell, some for space. So when you look at how Kellen Moore and why Kellen Moore has used motion in his offense, what has jumped out to you?
Well, there's many reasons why people use motion. But one of the main things that has now come into play, for years, everybody said, well, you use motion to try to get a read, whether it's man or zone. But defenses, they're smart too. The defensive coaches are pretty smart. So sometimes that's true, but it's not 100%. 10 years ago, it's probably 100%. Now it's not.
Right.
So that's one reason you might use it depending on your opponent. But one reason teams use motion now is because defenses, as they've gotten smarter and smarter and smarter, there's been a lot more disguise, late coverage rotation. If you start using a lot of motion, and the Miami Dolphins are a great example of this, the 49ers are a great example of this, what it does, and I had a great conversation with a veteran defensive coach about this because I'm trying to learn all this as well, is it shrinks the menu for the defense because they can't get caught up in all these different adjustments in response to motion, because if one guy makes a mistake or is late to the party, it's a big problem. So what happens is defenses end up not doing as much with their adjustments and their communication. They have, what defenses call their default defenses. They just end up lining up and playing in what they feel most comfortable with, and offenses know that. So motion is used very often, and sometimes it's used in conjunction with no huddle because it settles down the defense. The defense can't do a lot of things, and the offense then feels very, very comfortable before the snap of the ball as to what they're going to get.
So
Right, let's start
real quick. I'm sorry, Adam, I just want
go
with
ahead.
Kellen.
It's a great conversation.
Yeah, you mentioned the Niners and the Dolphins, and they use a lot of motion for their run game.
Yeah.
Is Kellen a guy who uses motion for that more so, or more for his passing game and creating space?
I would say that it can, it's used in both. And the run game, because it impacts run support. How are you going to, obviously people think of the pass game, but in motion also impacts run support. Who's going to be support players,
right?
And I think that becomes a critical piece. So, I would, we know that Jeff Stoutland, the O-line coach for the Eagles, hasn't really been a big fan of motion for whatever his reasons are. And I can't speak to why he prefers not to have motion, but I know that he's one reason they haven't done a lot of it. But I would think you're going to see more this year.
You would, oh yeah, because as you said, you don't want to hamstring your new coordinator.
No.
It's going to be Kellen's show anyway. So the guy he's going to be working with closely is obviously Jalen Hurts. Greg, give us kind of, because you mentioned to start this, how great it was for him in 22, and obviously there's a drop off. Just based on your tape study, what do you think were the challenges were with Hurts last season?
I think, and what I'm about to say, and I'm just going to tell you this in all honesty, because I spoke to coaches who were on the Eagles staff, is the biggest challenge you're going to face with Hurts is his expansive ability to be able to be a full field player. That's ultimately the main thing, because the year they won the Super Bowl, and this was evident on tape, but I had it confirmed as well with a conversation with a coach, is the middle of the season, and it didn't show up in the minds of fans because they made it to the Super Bowl, but they cut their offense down because he is not a full field reader. Now, because of his athletic traits and the run element he brings to the table, it did not hinder their offense in any meaningful way. But just from a pass game perspective, they cut their offense down because they had to play to his strengths and minimize his limitations. And that was an issue as well a year ago. So the big question, and Kellen Moore has to work through this, and hopefully, Jalen with more experience, we're not there, we don't know, but ideally with more experience, he can become more expansive in what you can do offensively with your pass game concepts.
When you say full field, and I think I know where you're going with this, because even in that great stretch and then they go to the Super Bowl, it seemed like he was aggressively looking to drive the ball downfield outside the numbers.
That's what they did a lot of, and they hit a lot of those, which you don't always hit, by the way.
Right.
They were just
especially
great
when you've got great receivers.
Yeah.
But the middle of the field is an area that I think people are expecting where Kellen Moore will try to make a difference, but it's also on the quarterback to be able to see it.
He doesn't work real well in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
Because that's where the reading and the timing and the anticipation really comes into play. Because, the hash marks in the NFL, the hash marks are closer. It seems like there's a lot of bodies in the middle of the field, and you have to really see it with tremendous clarity quickly this is where you get into all those terms: processing, elimination, and isolation, all those decision making, whatever terms you want to throw out, that's all part of that. And,
right.
And,
and you're also talking about not a RPO. You're talking about as a conventional passer.
No, I'm talking
RPO
right.
it was designed right to throw to the middle field, that one read. Yeah,
that's a totally different animal.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And that's why someone like Dallas Goedert, who you could easily make the argument from an ability standpoint is a top 3 tight end in the league, top 4 tight end in the league. You don't see him catch a lot of balls in the middle of the field.
Right.
And, normally that's a lot where tight ends work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Greg, with Moore's, Moore's big on 11 personnel. Usually, when he's got enough players, that's a big part of what he does. Kind of let's go over that way. We know it's Smith and Brown. Paris Campbell's a guy that Eagles were very high on when he came out for that draft, and he's been hurt a lot. Didn't get a real good chance to play. What are your thoughts on Paris Campbell in this offense?
Well, when he's played, he's been a really interesting player. I mean, because he's big and he can run, and he's a slot, and that's what they want. We don't know at this point in time, can he get through a season? I mean, but he fits what they want. But they hedged their bets a bit with a player whose tape I absolutely loved, by the way, and that was Aeneas Smith. They drafted him out of A&M. He's a slot, and he is really, really good. I mean, I loved his tape. Again, I know he got drafted, what was it, 5th round, somewhere around there?
Yeah, 5th round.
Yes, yeah. Aeneas Smith, yes.
Yeah, but I really love, and he was deployed a lot as a motion receiver, even in college. He is loose. He's fluid. He's got stop-start suddenness. He's really smooth changing direction. He's probably more quick than straight line fast, but he showed some electric playmaking traits in college. And again, I don't know the kid. I'm not surprised as to where he was drafted, but I thought he was really a good prospect. And I'm really curious to see, because again, we don't know about Paris Campbell. Unfortunately, he seems to get hurt a lot, but I really liked Aeneas Smith, and I'm really curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, another guy that we're curious about that they drafted around later because of his size is Johnny Wilson out of Florida State, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead.
Now he's he's a different type of animal, Greg. But could you see what did you see from his tape?
Yeah, I kept going back and forth on him. I mean, there were times I felt really good about him, and there are other times I thought, gee, is he more of a tight end type player? I mean, not a true tight end, because he's obviously never done that, and not blocked. But I mean, he's got a wingspan and size that are off the charts. He dropped a ton of balls in college, though, but he also had flashes of making outstanding catches with his ridiculously long arms extended away from his frame. But again, he dropped a ton of routine throws. He did not play to and impose his rare physical plates often enough for me. Again, but that's why he's a 6th round pick. So again, we're not sitting here talking about a guy who's a 1st round pick, right? Or, top, he's a 6th round pick for a reason, which doesn't mean he can't become a good player, but he had way too many drops. And while he wasn't slow in plotting, and there were times I thought, oh, he moves really well for a big guy, I still couldn't get a feel as to what that means on an NFL stage. Like, I don't know if he's going to be able to move well enough on the NFL stage.
Right.
Here's the funny thing. So talking to personnel people and coaches before the draft, Geoff and I were just exchanging information. It seemed like there was no in the middle with Johnny Wilson. Either you're like, wow, haven't seen a guy at 6'6" and 3/4 moving like this, or oh, he's too stiff.
Right.
On your point, he's a tight end. Now we were at the Senior Bowl and we're like, wow, an open space because there's no physical play. He moved pretty well. So he's a fascinating prospect. It could go either way. I'm sure he'll make the team because Howie has a tendency not to cut guys. Go ahead.
And Adam, that's the way I felt. It's funny you say that. You spoke to a bunch of people. There were times I felt, man, I think this guy can play. And other times I felt, oh, I just don't know. And me, normally I'm not like that. Normally based on tape study. And again, I'm going to be wrong on guys. Obviously, that's not the point. But normally I feel pretty good after I watch, because I actually watched him from the year before as well, last summer. So I saw all his targets for 2 straight years. And And I just kept going back and forth. Which is why he's a 6th round pick. It wouldn't surprise me if teams went back and forth too.
So there was a receivers coach that I talked to before the draft who said he didn't petition, but he went to his GM and said, I want to coach this guy. You can't find guys like this big who can move like this. Now, again, as you're saying, and this guy pointed out, not all the tape shows that he's been with that well, but he said there's enough in his body.
There is.
With some work. And so 1-2, he could be a functional, really good backup receiver. And again, with that size, you're talking about just under 6'7".
I mean,
there's something there with him.
And keep in mind, I mean, for whatever it's worth, he ran a 4.63 at that size.
Actually, 4.5. Didn't he run a 4.5?
4.63.
Okay.
And his vertical jump's 37. His arm length is 35 3/8, and his wingspan is over 84.
I think, it's actually, actually, you're looking at Isaiah Williams, I think. He actually ran a, Johnny Wilson, I think, ran a 4.52. Pretty certain of it.
Did he?
Yeah, at the combine. Yeah, that's what shocked people because he doesn't run to that.
I must have just typed in a wrong number when maybe I looked at wrong.
But here's the thing, man. And I saw this at the Senior Bowl. I'm like, I don't watch college tape like you do in season, so I don't know.
Right.
And my first exposure generally is at the Senior Bowl, and I'm like, wow. I know that there's no physical play, but to see someone that tall move like that, I found him intriguing, and I didn't know much about the player. I didn't know about
he ran a 4.52. You're right.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about. I know there was some maturity stuff, which was a concern, but just sticking to football, he's an intriguing prospect. And Greg, you know it. Looking at their receiver roster, the backup group's not very good, so he's going to have a chance here.
No, and like I said, now that it's a 4.52, I mean, think of the size, and so that's why when I kept watching, I was like, oh man, there's something here. But then I'd watch and I go, I'm just not sure. So we'll see. I mean, it's funny too. They brought in John Ross.
You ever see? We know he was world-class speed at Washington. He's been hurt almost his entire career. Was there anything? I know this is 2017, so this is a long time ago. But do you remember anything in watching his tape, whether it's pro or college? You go, okay, this guy could play at this level. Any thoughts on him?
Oh yeah, I thought he had a chance for sure. I mean, I can't remember everything I thought about him coming out, but I do remember that I thought that he was potentially more than just a speed guy.
Right.
And again, guys like that, and I don't know if you've talked to people, I haven't, but I don't know why guys like that don't make it. At least somewhat. I mean, he hasn't made it at all. Again, make it's a relative term. I didn't think he was going to catch 110 balls, but I mean, I thought he'd make it in the league. I mean, even if you think back to really fast guys who had a place in the league, like Devery Henderson with the Saints for 4 or 5 years, catching 38 balls for 17 yards a catch, I mean, that's making it, Ross hasn't even been anywhere near that.
Right. He'll be a fun story I'm sort of on Team Ross, just for the great storyline, Greg. I'd like to see it work out for him. I don't know if you've heard his press conferences, but he's been pretty candid about his shortcomings as a player.
Well, it's his last chance for sure. It's his last chance for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I just want to finish up on the offensive line with you really quickly. Before we do that, I'm just going to focus just for a second on the other Philadelphia team that's doing great. That's the Phillies, the first place Phillies. They are an amazing team to watch. I've already been to 3 Phillies games this year, and of course, I used the Game Time app. It is the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. That means getting tickets faster and easier, and the prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They've got these amazing last-minute deals and all-in prices. The last time I went to a Phillies game, used the Game Time app, it took me about 5 minutes to find exactly what I was looking for because I saw the seat. I'm picky about where I'm sitting when I'm watching the Phillies, especially when it gets brutally hot. Everybody likes the little overhang ahead of them. And I'm a little bit picky on the price, so I just want to make sure I'm getting the best value. The Game Time app allows you to do that so easily. It really just took me 10 minutes to find what I was looking for. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for not just the Phillies, all sports, concerts, comedy, theater using the Game Time app. They've got exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. Those are called their flash deals. I mentioned the all-in pricing. It shows you everything you're going to pay right up front. So by the time you get to checkout, there's no extra fees that surprise you that make it twice what you were expecting to spend. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. That includes lowest the job loss protection, the event cancellation protection, and the 24-hour returns guarantee. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code BIRDS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code BIRDS, BIRDS, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. As we finish off previewing the Eagles offense, Greg, obviously new center, not Jason Kelce. It'll be Cam Jurgens, right? And new right guard. We'll see if it's Tyler Steen or somebody else like Mekhi Becton experimentally. But you were the first person with us last year to really sort of remark, starting with the New England Patriots game in the season opener and then a couple other times throughout the year, that the elite greatness of the Eagles offensive line was starting to come back to earth a little bit. Still a very good O-line, but there were times that they would get worked that we hadn't seen in years past. So when you look at them now without Jason Kelce, new center, new right guard, what do you think of when you think of this offensive line in totality?
Well, there's two question marks. I mean, we can say that they love Cam Jurgens, and I think most people do, but, you know, he's now a starting center in the NFL in his third year. So he's a little bit of a question. Tyler Steen, a player I really liked. He played left tackle his entire college career, 3 years at Vandy, final year at Alabama. And now, you know, he's playing right guard, where so far, whenever he's been there, he's done okay. But, you know, you're playing with two new players. And that's always a question until you play. And you know, I think that it'll be interesting with the two tackles. Look, Lane Johnson is arguably a Hall of Famer, but Lane Johnson, you know, he came out in 2013 and he's been fighting injuries. Last year was the first time. And the reason you notice it is because it never happened.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's like for 3 years, it never, ever happened that he would ever get beat. And last year, you started to notice him get beat once in a while. And not, I don't want people to think like he's getting beat regularly, you know, but every once in a while, be like, wait, I don't recall seeing that. You know, how does that happen? You know, because he's been so good. It's been ridiculous.
Right.
You know, it's like where pass rushers would go to die, you know, but last year it started to show up a little. And again, he's older, he's been injured. So I don't want to say he's a question because it's not like he's going to be awful, but, you know, he started to get beat a little bit. And then even I thought Mailata at times last year it struggled a bit. I don't know what you guys thought. And, you know,
I thought so too. Yeah.
You know, because the number one key, and I've had this conversation with so many O-line coaches, the number one key in the NFL, and it's one reason why the Eagles offense can be so good at times and has been in recent years, is your two tackles have to be able to pass protect one-on-one on third down. Have to, because then you can send 5 out. You have to be, if you're going to have a big-time pass game on third down, for the most part, like I said, nothing's 100% in anything in football, but for the high percentage wise, if you're going to have a big time third down pass game in the NFL, you got to send 5 out, which means your tackles have to be able to pass protect one-on-one.
It's a big deal because they gotta bring it back here, but they've got some changes. A couple guys before we move on, I just want to talk about. Did you see Trevor Keegan from Michigan? I'm sure you did. What were your thoughts on him? And anything, if you've got anything on Dylan McMahon?
I did not see Dylan McMahon. He was one guy I missed. So I just.
How about Keegan?
Keegan, you know, it's funny. Michigan had a really great O-line for college football. But as individual players, they're probably more, I don't want to say they're just guys, but I don't think anybody thought, based on, of course, where they're drafted, Keegan was a 5th round pick. I don't think anybody thought that these guys were like studs. You know, like Keegan to me was just like a strong physical presence, solid player, knew how to play. I actually met him at the O-line's Masterminds last year. Really impressive kid, super impressive kid. Knows how to play, like one of those guys that doesn't have great physical traits, but is tough, physical, knows how to use his hands in pass pro. Could he end up being a solid starter in the league? Sure. I mean, they've got a great O-line coach. So could he become that guy? Yeah, he probably could. But traits-wise, you don't look at him and go, man, this guy's going to be really special. You know, I mean, he's a 5th round pick.
Right. All right. You ready to move on to the defensive? Right. We'll switch sides and talk about the Eagles defense. Let's start up front, Greg. A lot of changes there. No, just like we just talked about with no Jason Kelsey at center, no Fletcher Cox. But you get year 2 of Jalen Carter, and obviously big year for Jordan Davis. Vic Fangio comes in. Clint Hurt is now the interior defensive line coach. What strikes you about this starting defensive line?
Well, it's a lot of changes here, so we're going to have to figure out first and foremost what it's going to look like. Are they going to be playing 5-man fronts? Is it going to be more of a base 4-3? What's it going to look like? I don't think I mean, it's going to be situational, but we don't know that. It was kind of their fronts the last couple of years. Their base was clearly a 5-2. I mean, they played out of 5-man fronts. We'll see. I mean, Zach Bond, who they signed from New Orleans, and Nolan Smith, to me, are kind of maybe Smith more than Bond, but they're the 2 wild cards here. Because Bond, you probably remember him, Geoff, at Wisconsin, because you're a Big Ten guy. He was a pass rusher.
Yep.
I mean, he was a double-digit sack guy in college, and then went to New Orleans, and obviously was a special teams guy and a backup, and they didn't use him as a pass rusher. My sense was they tried to transition him to be a stacked backer, and I don't know if he's that guy. I wasn't in New Orleans, so I don't know, but he was a pass rusher in college. So the question is, for somebody like Fangio, does he become like an Andrew Van Ginkel, who, he had in Miami last year, who very often lined up on the edge and rushed the quarterback? And Van Ginkel, by the way, is also a Wisconsin kid. So, does Vic see Bond the same way and see him more as a pass rusher? And what is Nolan Smith's role here? Is Nolan Smith because he's not a true D end in a 4-3. Like, you can't line him up as a base D end in a 4-3. I'm not even sure Bryce Huff is great at that, but that's another question. So I think Smith and Bond I'm not sure they know what they are. We don't.
Yeah, based on what you just said, I mean, I would stand to reason, at least logically to me, that their personnel suggests that they would be better off playing a 5-man front again, like they've been doing the last few years.
What Vic did in Miami last year, there were a lot of 5-man fronts.
Right.
The other guy who I find, because I really liked his tape coming out, and I've spoken to people in the building who say that this guy, that he shows up in practice, and I really like Moro Ajomo. He was a 7th-round pick a year ago, but when he played, he showed up, and I'm really curious to see his development, because I liked him far more than a 7th-round pick.
Yeah, I remember when he came out, both Adam and I were told, we talked to different people and told that the Longhorns felt, their coaching staff felt he was their best interior pass rusher that year, and they were surprised that he wasn't drafted until
his tape was good. I mean, again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you he should have been a top 60 pick, but I thought he easily could have been a 3rd or 4th round pick, and to me, that wouldn't have been a reach.
So, Greg, you talked about, as we stay on the D line here, Carter now is a full-time starter with Cox gone. What did Carter's tape look like to you over the totality of the season, not just early when he's playing well? As an overview, what did you think of his tape?
He flashed ridiculous greatness, but didn't play at a high enough level all the time. Not what you want from him, which is, it's okay in a sense that he's a rookie who only probably played 30 to 35 snaps a game in college. So there was going to be an adjustment despite the outrageous physical traits that he brings to the table. So now you want him to be able to play 55, 60 snaps a game and be a dominant force. Now, no one's a dominant force on every snap. We know that. It's the NFL. But you know what I'm saying. And I'm not sitting here saying he should be Aaron Donald or else he's a bust. But, I mean, you want him to be moving more in the direction of being a dominant type interior player that has to be accounted for by offenses. That's the direction you want him to move.
And obviously, Greg, big year for Jordan Davis.
This is the year. Apparently, he lost meaningful weight.
Yep.
Look, Howie even said when they drafted him, I think the night they drafted him, that if he doesn't turn out to be a pass rusher, it's not a good pick. Didn't he say that?
He did say if he doesn't cut like a 3-down lineman at some point, that it would not.
That's what he's got to be. Now, again, that doesn't mean he has to play 60 snaps a game, but he has to be out there on 3rd down.
Right.
Otherwise, because you can find run stuffing D tackles. Shoot, they brought back Linval Joseph 2 years ago. I mean, you can find those guys. You don't need to draft them to trade up for those guys to the 13th pick in the draft.
Yeah. Well, I think we can all do math pretty easily here. And we know that Vic Fangio doesn't blitz a whole lot. So if we're counting 4 men for the 4-man rush, I think you get to at least 4 or 5 names right now, at least, before you say Jordan Davis. So he's kind of got a big bridge to gap there, or gap to bridge, I should say.
Without question. And, there's a couple of other interesting players here as well. One is Milton Williams, who I think is a really nice player. The question is, can his snap count increase to the point where he can be a really nice player playing more than he has? In the role that he's been in, he's been a really nice player.
All right. Well, all right. Well, let's go to Jameis Hunt, because here's the great thing about Hunt. So we had Greg on our pre-draft show, and I know you said because of the school, you have to go get the tape, and you got the tape. And let's refresh people what you told us and what do you felt.
The guy is a little freakish athletically. Don't forget, he started out as a safety. And I mean,
at Cornell.
I said to someone, a scout that I know well, I said, what if he did this and looked like this and he played in the SEC? What would people think? And the scout said to me, he probably would have been a first-round pick. So, I mean, he gets knocked because of where he played. Now, I'm not saying that's not valid. Obviously, he's not playing against the kind of competition that he'd be playing against in the NFL. So I'm not saying that that's wrong, but the guy's got really high-level athletic traits. Now, could there be a meaningful learning curve for a number of reasons? Transition switch, not high-level competition, but the guy's a little freakish.
All right. We will see, because we're not exactly sure yet how much he's going to make an impact. He has to, again, talk about.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, he could
a big gap to bridge there.
He could not be active for the first 10 games too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of stuff you just don't know.
Yep. So let's move to the middle then, and let's put Zach Bond aside for a second, because he's another guy. He's kind of a wild card. We don't know if the 2 linebackers that we expect to start in maybe it's their base nickel defense would be Nakobe Dean here, entering a pivotal 3rd year, and Devin White from the Bucs. So I want to ask you a couple things. One, we know Devin White got benched last year. What did you see on tape that he wasn't doing very well? And 2, how would you think Dean and Devin White compare to what they had last year in Morrow and Cunningham?
Well, I don't know what Nakobe Dean is, so I can't really answer that. I mean,
well, what do you remember seeing about Nakobe Dean before he got hurt? I know it was a couple of games.
Well, I'll tell you this. I thought that Jeremiah Trotter's college tape was better than Nakobe Dean's college tape, but that's,
wow.
what I thought.
Okay.
I love Jeremiah Trotter's college tape, but he's small, just like Dean, so therefore he's a 5th-round pick. Devin White's a guy that has always been a great pass rusher and has always struggled, in the coverage portion of the game, but he's super athletic and he's a great pass rusher. And he was used that way by Todd Bowles. I mean, there were times, I mean, you guys can remember this. The Eagles it seems like they play the Bucs every year. And that's what his game is. So, again, I don't know if change in coaching, a different voice in his ear, the fact that he's on a new team now and maybe he has a little bit of sense of mortality to his career, because he's got physical traits. So, that's what you never know about a player. We don't know these guys personally, but the guy's physically gifted. And he's not old. I mean, it's not like he's been in the league 10 years.
Right.
The other guy I find really fascinating that they signed, and I'm really curious, this is a new coaching staff, guys, now. So, Nakobe Dean is not automatically a starter. I mean, this is a whole new coaching staff. The other guy I find really interesting, and I know his game really well going back to college, and because he was with the Niners, who I do radio, so I've seen every single game for years and years and years. Oren Burks is a fascinating player. He's 6'3", 230. He's long. He's athletic. He's a really good pass defender. He's a fascinating guy to me. So, again, this linebacker group, to me, I have no idea at the end of June how this is going to play out.
They got a lot of them. That's for
sure.
They
got a lot of them.
They do.
And they're all different. I mean, they're all different. Because Burks is 6'3", long and athletic. Dean and Trotter are short and, different players. Bond is probably his best trait's a pass rusher. White is probably his best trait is pass rusher. it's going to be interesting.
Is Vic a
Greg, you
sim
know what's-
pressure guy, Greg? Like, do you think we could see every once in a while White rush the passer while maybe Nolan Smith drops back?
Without question.
the
Without
hook defender?
question.
Okay.
Yes, without question.
Well, that's might be something that we haven't seen in the past. Then that
No,
the
they
Eagles
didn't
get
do a lot
into.
of sim pressure.
They do a lot of sim, yeah. You know, it's interesting. White, Bond, and Burks are on 1-year deals. It just tells you kind of where they're at. Now,
Yeah.
they've got younger at inside backer. They have a lot of players, but we'll see what happens. One guy, before we get to the secondary, Greg, and we've all been fans of Josh Sweat. I know it wasn't good for him. He took a pay cut, so that tells you kind of what the Eagles thought of his season last year, but they brought him back. They guaranteed a lot of money, though he took a pay cut. What did you see from Josh Sweat last season?
Yeah, I thought the last half of last season he did not play as well. I thought the year prior and maybe even the year before that, so it would be 21 and 22, I thought he was the Eagles' best defensive lineman, overall. I mean, you can argue Reddick was maybe a better pass rusher. And by the way, we didn't even mention Bryce Huff, who, again, he was a situational pass rusher, really good at it, sensational at it, but has never played a lot of snaps. So that's a question, too. But getting back to Sweat, I thought for 2 years he was the best D lineman on the Eagles and one of the best in the league. And I don't know what happened last year. Again, that's another case where the play declined over the last half of the season. I can't tell you why. But
did he look right physically?
Don't forget he's had that major knee injury. He's not old, but he's getting older, and he's played snaps. So I don't know. Does that? I don't know if his body's just wearing down.
All right, let's move to the back end here. Before we do that, we'll pause and hear a word from our friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schulter makes sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
If you stop into Sky Motor Cars in Westchester, PA, make sure you tell them Adam and Geoff sent you. You'll get a great deal. If not, just visit them at SkyMotorCars.com. Well, Greg, I think last year, in the middle of the year, toward the end, we were talking about this Eagles secondary, and you would make a comment, an accurate one, about how it was one of the slower and less dynamic secondaries in the league. Even when they weren't doing anything wrong coverage-wise, just in their normal coverage packages. But now you've got Quinyon Mitchell. Now you got Cooper DeJean, CJ Gardner, Johnson comes back. Does this secondary have the feel for you of being more athletic and dynamic, the potential for it to be, than last year?
Well, it's certainly more athletic.
Yeah.
We don't know about the rookies, but look, they told you what they thought of the secondary by what they drafted. I mean, you guys know that. I mean, Adam's known me longer than you, Geoff, but you know me well enough to know that teams tell you what they think.
Of course.
One
of our favorite phrases, when a guy signs a 1-year deal that everybody loves, like last year with Terrell Edmonds, and we said, guys, it's a 1-year deal, 600,000 base.
Right.
The league is telling you what Terrell Edmonds is.
I mean, the Eagles basically told you what they think of their secondary by what they drafted.
Right.
I mean, and look, all of us, I hope anything we say should never be construed as personal. Right. I'm sitting here, Geoff, you've not been in my office. Adam has, many times. I mean, I just sit and watch tape. That's what I do. Obviously you have to know people and all that, which I don't get to do, but watching tape and watching tape with all my guys on the matchup show, there's 4 or 5 other guys that, during the season, we're all watching tape. And we would all say by the middle of the season that, you just can't put James Bradbury out there at outside corner. Mm-hmm. And again, it's not personal, I mean, you just can't. And the Eagles know that. That's why they drafted Quinyon Mitchell. And by the way, they did sign Isaiah Rodgers the year before. He had to sit out the whole season. But the year prior, he was a starting outside corner for the Colts and was not a star, but he was solid. He was solid. He was better than Bradbury was last year. So, I mean, look, in an ideal world, they would probably like Quinyon Mitchell to develop to the point where he's the corner opposite Slay. And by the way, Slay was not great last year either. He's closer to the end than the beginning.
Now he had knee surgery, so just so you know, he had knee surgery. So that might have played into why maybe he dropped off. But he's 33. He turns 34 in January, Greg. That he's the oldest starting corner right now in the National Football League. I
Yeah,
believe.
so I mean,
Yeah.
you know, he's going to be a starter barring anything unforeseen,
Yeah.
but he's not what he was either. You know, and again, it's all based on tape. It's like I said, nothing personal. But, you know, I'm sure they would like Slay and Mitchell to be the starting corners, but Rodgers is sort of the stopgap here. And Cooper DeJean, I'm sure they'd like him to be the slot. I mean, I think he could be a dynamite slot. I think he's got some concerns on the outside, but he's a really good football player. He's one of those guys you just say he's a really good football player, but he just doesn't have absolutely the traits you love on the outside. But I think he could be a great slot.
Greg, you accurately called. In fact, I remember when you told me this. I don't know if someone told you this or you just based on your tape study, but you told me Malcolm Jenkins is going to have to move to safety. He's not going to be a corner. I was like, how do you know that? Like, you were very matter of fact. Like, there's no way he's going to be
No,
playing corner.
I knew that from watching the tape.
Right. Okay, that's what happened. Okay,
Yeah.
so let me ask you a question. So Geoff and I exchanged information on Cooper DeJean, and almost to every coach or team we talked to, they said long term he's a safety. He's not an outside corner.
Right.
Now, do you see him as a safety going forward potentially?
Yes. Because I think he sees the game extremely well, and I think he's super instinctive. And I hate using that word because it can mean 100 things, but I mean,
Sure.
he just has a feel for how to play, and he's physical, and he has good ball production. You know, when he sees it, he doesn't have great ball production when he doesn't see it, which is at corner, but when he sees it, he does. So yes, I think Cooper DeJean down the road could be a really good safety.
Let's talk about CJ Gardner-Johnson, Greg, because he comes back and he brought such a playmaking element to the team 2 years ago before he got hurt. Yeah,
He's got a ton of
swagger, the interceptions.
Yep.
You know, it seemed like when they use him, when he's used well, you know, they might start off too high, but he comes down in like a cover one robber look and he can jump a route or be an extra defender. So if they continue to use him that way as someone who comes in and tries to jump routes or to be disruptive, then the post safety in this case is either Reed Blankenship or maybe Sidney Brown if he's ready to be healthy. Obviously they'll rotate a lot.
Well,
but I'm just talking about when they want to use TJ in that role where he's coming in. How do you see that deployment?
Well, I imagine with Vic Fangio, what you'll see a lot of is quarters structure to start. Okay. Now, again, everybody just says, well, he plays quarters. Well, sure he does. And that's what he's known for, but that's not all he plays. But when you start in a quarters structure, you can do anything off of that. And CJ Gardner-Johnson has a great feel for reading splits, reading routes. You know, he's just an innately smart player. So he fits really well into this defense and can be used in multiple ways. Actually, Blankenship's the same kind of player. He's just not the athlete you'd ideally like to have, but he's kind of the same. You know, I don't think Sidney Brown is that guy, and he's not that guy right now. Now, maybe he can become that guy, but he's not that guy right now.
Right.
So, you know, I would expect Brown, now that CJ's back, to be kind of a situational player and not get a ton of snaps within the defense. I just don't think he fits just yet.
What would be
one
his
guy
strength?
that
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have cut you off, but I'm just wondering where do you see Brown fitting in a Vic Fangio style defense when he's ready to play?
You know, he's a safety. You know, they had to play him at slot corner last year, but I don't think he's a slot corner.
No, he struggled there. Yeah.
He'd have to be a safety. There was a player, let's see, where do I see him fitting? That's a hard question to answer right now. He'd have to get better as a player that sees things from the back end, because he predominantly, you know, everybody talks about, well, he's got the physical traits. I talk about that too. We all do. Yes, he's a very fast straight line runner. You know, he can hit people, but when you're playing safety on the back end in a quarter structure, you know, it's almost like a quarterback on offense. You've got to see things and feel things and understand things intuitively. Sidney Brown played almost exclusively in the box in college. That's not his experience. So he's got to sort of learn all that. And then it has to become second nature. And I can't speak to whether that will happen or not.
So one guy, Greg, that has had an interesting offseason is Keely Ringo. Now, Ringo didn't contribute much until late last season, but the light, from what I've understood, he's been better with the match carry deliver system. He very confident now what he's being asked to do.
Right.
I know they have a ton of corners now. All of a sudden, they have a lot of corners. Well, go back to Georgia. What did you see in his game, and how do you think he would fit in this system?
I think he could play in this system. Again, he was a 4th-round pick, and I thought that's where he should have been drafted because he's stiff. He's straight line fast, but he's stiff. So you got to try to work through that, and you can probably deal with that to some degree, with certain kinds of training and all that. To maybe he's never going to be loose, and fluid, but I mean you can work through that a little bit. He's big, he's physical, he can run. Yeah, he can play in this system because there is press elements to it. I think he's probably better in press than off. But we'll see. I mean, I thought he had some moments a year ago. I thought he was better than Eli Ricks. So, again, maybe he gets a shot too somewhere along the line. Look, Darius Slay, like you said, Geoff, ideally they want him to be able to play 17 games and play at a reasonably high level.
But playoffs.
But his age is such that he could get nicked up.
Mm-hmm.
One thing on Ringo on the stiffness. So we had heard the same stuff about his college tape. So I ran, because he's had a good offseason, I ran the stiffness part. I said, hey, to someone who did his college tape, I said, how do you think he'll fit in Philly's system with Fangio? And he goes, you don't lose stiffness. If you have it, yes, you could try certain things, exercises, but guys who can't transition well, I don't care how athletic or straight line speed they have. He goes, this stiffness does not go away.
No, normally it doesn't.
And that's a tough thing for Ringo.
Yeah.
That
normally athletic traits, it's funny. I'm watching a ton of college guys now, in addition to NFL, who are going to be in next year's draft. I probably looked at 75 guys, and people always say, well, you can't judge that they're going to play another year. Well, of course, and I'm going to watch them next year too before the draft. That's what I do. But normally traits, physical athletic traits, don't dramatically change. I mean, can a guy get stronger? Sure. Can a guy, technique-wise learn? Yeah. But, the athletic traits don't dramatically, a guy who runs a 4.65 is not going to run a 4.42. That's not going to happen. So Ringo is not all of a sudden going to look like Patrick Surtain. It's not going to happen.
Right. It's like our friend Jason Avant telling us after his Michigan career, he went down to Miami to train and run the 40, and he thought the hotter sun and more time on the outdoor track, he was going to run faster, and it wound up he ran the same exact time.
I mean, a guy can go from 4.51 to 4.48, but he's not going to go from 4.51 to 4.38. It's not going to happen.
And that's why I went in the 4th, because he projects really long-term Ringo to be a quality backup, but really not a starter, because you're worried about that stiffness in transition. So I'll say this, Greg, for the Eagles defense, there's more talent. They've gotten younger. They have issues. They got new coaches. They're going to be a fascinating watch because there's been so much change.
Yeah, because right now at the end of June, we don't know a lot of, we know the questions, we just don't know the answers.
Yeah,
and look, I spoke to a defensive coordinator yesterday. He actually called me because he was in this area and he was hoping to stop by, but he couldn't. He was saying the issues he faces now. And he said, I can laugh about it now. In 3 weeks, I won't be laughing. These guys, there's a lot of things they don't know either until they really start working with their players,
Sure. All right, Greg. Well, as Adam mentioned, a lot of change with the Eagles, both on defense, on offense. We've previewed it all. Very pivotal season for Nick Sirianni and the Philadelphia Eagles. And, well, it's just a couple of weeks away now, a couple of days away, really, from training camp beginning, and we're all excited about it. And we really appreciate you doing this 4-part series with us. You do it every year. You're fantastic. I don't think anybody breaks down the teams as well as you do. So we've done Washington, New York, Dallas. This was Philadelphia. That's going to complete our 4-part annual NFC East Preview Series. So for Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been listening to Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles Intel. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the birds. Be sure to check out our friends at PHLSportsNation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at PHLSportsNation.com and on Twitter at PHL Sports Nation.